Ciao Bambini. I thought we'd do another revisiting of classic blog post series because there was a lot of good feedback on the last one. And I think we'll end up doing all of them. But the second one, because obviously we've done one, but we have to kind of drop down to a smaller series, the World Without Sin series, before we kind of hit the main ones. And the reason for that is contained within this kind of idea of the World Without Sin is the is the main reason why you may have to find some of the revisitings of other seasons or series rather on other platforms, like I mentioned, Rumble and Odyssey last week, right? And that's because the other series are about things that are now basically impossible to say in a lot of corners of the internet. And that's the important distinction, right? So it's impossible to say, and that's where this kind of world without sin idea comes from. Now, the term is a line, and I mean, there's got to be a statute of limitations on spoilers, right? Because I'm about to spoil a 20-year-old movie. I'm about to. It's a line from Serenity, which is the kind of like film set in the world of a pre-cancelled Joss Whedon's Firefly universe, right? And it was a refrain that the villain who was chasing the good guys would use. He considered that his job was to help bring about what he called a world without sin. And again, speaking of things you can and can't say, one of the things in the film that was concealed was there was a planet where they tried an experimental medication on the population that turned them into violent psychopaths and killed them all, right? And so they're trying to cover up essentially a large amount of medical damage, which is, spicy at the moment in and of itself. But the idea of a world without sin is the rather than using other terms, and this is important, right? So there are other terms like censorship, cancellation, deplatforming, all of these kind of propaganda, right? And these are all true and in play and what have you. But to what end? What is happening? And that's what the world without sin idea is, that these sweeping statements and moves are designed to make the world clean, make it look clean. So it's not so much a crushing of dissent, like we disagree with you, we think your words are dangerous, and so you should not be able to be on YouTube. I don't know. It's more technocratic and cleaner than that. It's simply erasing it, right? That didn't happen. And so that's the, and I've been really interested in this stuff my whole life, this idea of communications theory and how it reflects and co-creates reality. So I was like obviously a 90s chaos kid, right? And then I went and did film and communication in the early noughties. So the whole idea of communication theory, and if people don't know, I had a reasonable media career, mostly in London, but in a bunch of places around the world before that. So, and I would give talks on, and I was always publisher side, so I'd give talks on publisher strategy and so on. And this is kind of one of those areas where, because there's effectively no difference between them, magic and communications in that real mercurial sense align, because it's not enough to. So let's take some really good examples. When it was, what's his name? The one who looks like Zodiac Killer, Ted Cruz, when he was forbidden to go to the Texan border as a Texan senator to see the border crossings and so on, that was part of that, like having the White House deny. Remember at the beginning of the year that there was any border crisis whatsoever. So see how that's different to disagreeing with Ted Cruz over immigration policy and refugee policy. That's just like, no, right? That's a world without sin. It's not happening. The borders are fine, right? It's that real clean idea. And it's the hallmark of a particular technocratic totalitarianism. So if you look at the posts, which hopefully I've linked them all up below this video, you'll see that the impetus for me writing a World Without Series post has been something that historically had happened digitally, right? So if you go back to 2015, it'll be different things, and what was getting shit about social media, which is now unusable, and what have you. But so it was the overarching idea is this cleanness, or what I call removal of friction, and that was because that's what was so top of mind in app developers maybe about 6 or 7 years ago, particularly when it came to the so-called mobile web, was the mobile web, it's still shit, right? And the building of app ecosystems was all about removing friction from a certain process. This is all pre-Uber and so on, like ordering a car or food or so on. The goal was to make the world without sin. It was to operate smoothly, right? So that's the difference between, say, propaganda or suppressing dissent and just making it clean. And the best example, and this is just perfect, right? So the fact that Let's Go Brandon exists at all is a testament to that attempt to not disagree, but it was that, NBC reporter saying, I think they're saying Let's Go Brandon. It's that like, nope, it's not happening idea. And the reason for doing this one now is I was sort of putting my notes together. Depending on when you're watching this, obviously it might be old news, but YouTube is removing the dislike button from everyone. And if you look at the videos explaining this, you'll see the White House videos being absolutely ratioed. So there's this direct line between Let's Go Brandon, which they're trying to criminalize, but it itself exists as this term that emerged out of this attempt to create a world without sin. And because that has failed, the next bit, if you remove the dislike buttons, you see the logic in that, the technocratic logic of a world without sin. It's like, no one dislikes this. There are no dislikes on this video. And it's the right way, I think, or the most useful way. This always happens with so-called fiction, that rather than talking about propaganda and platforming and deplatforming and cancellation and so on, like I said, all real and true things, what's the frame of understanding, particularly when it comes to this kind of like beaming technocratic dystopia? What's the right frame for it? And if you haven't seen, I haven't really spoiled it, but if you haven't seen Serenity, you even, again, depending on how you feel about cancelled creators, it's not, I think there's only like 13 episodes of Firefly. It's a little bit dated, but there's some good stuff in there about how you attempt to live at the edge of a clean technocratic tyranny, essentially. And even if you don't want to watch all of them, the film is quite good as a standalone. Beside the point. The point is that kind of framing, rather than talking about disinfo and suppression and all the rest of it, opens up like a 360 view of how these kind of what the goal was, what's actually happening, what is this world, and the world without sin is the right way of saying it. It's actually just to make it look clean. And the thing about, I guess you could call it propaganda, is that it always fails, it always stops working before a regime falls. And that happens anywhere. But this is that kind of real Pravda moment in the West where and we're in it now. And I'm doing this, I'm kind of like throwing this like a ring into a volcano, into the particular space weather, because it looks at the moment like the turning point is around the narrative failure. Again, I have to be careful with my words on certain platforms. But if you look at what is the overarching narrative, rather than it being a specific thing, it's this world without sin. That's what the technocratic implementation looks like in their heads, right? I've got my boomer rectangle just to make sure I've spoken about everything. Oh yeah, so I want to go back to the career I had with publishers and how I started thinking about the world without sin, because I was part of the process of making different platforms work in a frictionless way. And all the way back when or then, we sort of documented on the blog, and I got to live through it professionally. We all have to live through it, and now we have to live in it, was the rise of the stream. And the stream is a really good manifestation of understanding a world without sin, particularly if you look at something like TikTok, which is sort of the ultimate and final expression of social media in its purest refined sugar form, right? Because it, in terms of TikTok creators, it only incentivizes really for completed video view. So you can have, doesn't matter how many followers or whatever you have once you get on that stream. And the purpose of that is to keep as many people on it as possible while it learns the kind of stuff you like and only delivers that. And I'm sure if any of you, I mean, many of you use it, but you can lose like 3 hours and most of your battery on a phone to this action. And this is the ultimate expression of the stream. But remember, the stream is kind of new. The stream is less than a decade old. It was Facebook newsfeed was sort of it, but it was really the kind of main rise of Twitter in the 2010s in terms of adoption that saw the rise of the stream as the idea. And the stream repositions you or puts you in different relation to information because the expectation is that it comes to you, but it comes to you in the way of like the kind of morbidly obese survivors of the human race in, what's that Pixar film, that robot one, where you're just lying back on a lazy boy endlessly consuming it, right? So it isn't. You're not even in a library at that point. You're in a like an all-you-can-eat prison buffet. It's you and information, and it's not that that's universally bad either. Like the technology can be used to deliver information in enriching ways, right? So it's not that it's universally bad. The badness is the centrality of the stream. That's the world without sin, because you miss all the other stuff that is no longer in the stream. It's just what's in there is real. And I find that endlessly fascinating. I found it alarming. And so these posts, it's more I wanted to return the topic or the phrase to the center of attention for people following the blog and the videos now, rather than like with the whiskey rant, look and go, well, these held up and this didn't. Because the sort of overarching idea is the same in all of them, which is just kind of like touching back in on this idea and getting to document the rise of where we are in terms of the delivery of the world without sin and what you can, and not even what you can and can't say, but what is allowed to exist in a world without sin and what is not. Now, one of the things that I kind of mentioned, I think at the very beginning post, and it's a pretty good call, frankly, is it must have been 2015 or so, saying that the internet's going to end up looking like WeChat, which was very unknown at the time. And it has, right? And it's going to get more and more like that as we move into 2022. And these, I'm not going to say the word, passports will be used to log into certain websites. And basically the idea is being floated in countries, unsurprisingly, states in Australia, because that's how it goes down here at the moment. But this idea of being able to not just, you need to be without sin to access the world without sin. And this is very easy to achieve. Like, I know I have a bunch of crypto nerds and whatever who think this won't happen. But 80%, if you exclude pornography, 80% of all web traffic goes to less than 20 websites. The Pareto principle rules everywhere, right? So what that means is if you are required to, for those of you still using it, and plenty of boomers, are, for those of you who are still using social media, you can get asked, there will be like a verification process to use that, and that's most of web traffic, right? So it seems to me but that's that whole kind of, once you get to that level, which is very WeChat level, once you're in there, you can transact. You have your, like Facebook knows your social security system, or Twitter, your social security number. And from in there, you can, it's funny you say pay bills. In the ultimate expression of this technocratic project, it'll just be that the CBDCs will automatically be removed from you, right? But that kind of rise of the stream and move of the web experience towards something that looks like the sort of facial recognition, effectively mandatory app that you get in China to do everything has kind of, we're on our way there. Now, I don't want to end it on a bad note, like on a downer, because you think, well, shit, what the hell is the point? And this is the final bit, the kicker, as to why I like this world without sin framing rather than talking about disinformation, propaganda, cancellation, whatever, is there's another line in it. And in fact, the whole film, and this is the spoiler, I guess, the whole film kind of swings on this notion that you can't stop the signal. And that's ultimately what brings down the bad guy, right, in the film. But this idea that you can't stop the signal. Because I know for the maybe three other people who still regularly blog, people like it, and people are kind of like, well, is blogging coming back? Blah, blah, blah. No, it's not ever coming back. But you know what I was thinking the other day? It has come back and no one's noticed in the form of Substack and other newsletter platforms and what have you, right? That's blogging because it's someone's take that you have subscribed to. You might be paying for them, you might not. That's not the point. You're getting a text-based take from someone. The difference is it comes into your inbox, which again is quite streamified, right? So it comes to you rather than out there in that wild web, which no longer exists outside the stream. The internet is Twitter and your inbox. But nevertheless, the other good thing about, well, one of the other behavioral reasons I think that Substack has emerged and is a can't stop the signal indicator is, and believe me, I know this, if you actually have the stones to publicly take positions, it's just fodder for anonymous shit-lib nonsense, right? And that's across everyone, all industries, what have you. And you can just kind of erase more of that. You can weld without sin yourself by doing something just in a newsletter base. I mean, the blog obviously has the newsletter options, which will update you. You don't get embedded videos and so on, but you at least know, same as any other kind of newsletter. And that's worked really well. So arguably the blog does that same thing, right? Like most people navigate to the blog because of the newsletter. But effectively blogging in its own way has come back. And going all the way back to the beginning of my career in New Zealand, there was a blogger. He's presumably still alive. I haven't actually checked. Who I knew, who had like New Zealand's a small place. Had like the blog that everyone read at the time. And he was early in blogging, and he said it was like pamphleteering. He said, what I like about blogging is it's like pamphleteering. It has that kind of... it has the opportunity to be a decentralized political voice. And like everything else about the internet, that did not turn out to be true. But there is a sense of it. And there's a sense of that can't stop the signal in and amongst the like world without sin that is happening around us in something like Substack. But also, and I think I mentioned this in a previous video, Glenn Greenwald, of course, if you are someone who stood up to actual fascists and stared them down and won. So obviously American anti-fascists don't like him. But so he's on Substack, of course, but he's also on Rumble. And this is another good example, which you might be watching this on Rumble, of this world without sin. The platforms, and I've watched them come up with hope the last 18 months, particularly Odyssey and Rumble, with the hope that they will survive and be usable, because it's obviously for smaller sites, smaller video sites, there's a bandwidth challenge. But they both seem to be getting there, you know. And so there's this whole, at least for now, and this is the whole kind of final message of Can't Stop the Signal. And I wrote a post about it early in the year, maybe in May, which I think a couple of people got wrong, because I was really excited about, and this is a funny way of saying it, because I'm not in particular alignment with Jesse Singal on a bunch of stuff. I think he and Katie have a mostly entertaining podcast. But it was more when he was being cancelled for some trans article. I don't know what he wrote. I don't read it. That's kind of like my point. It didn't work. Like the pile-on continuously happened on Twitter, and he had people trying to get him, trying to prevent him from being paid by, journalistic outfits that were going to hire him and all this kind of stuff. But he went on Substack and he went on Rumble and so on. And that was the Can't Stop the Signal moment, where the grinding down of this deplatforming and moving out of stuff that disagrees with the totalizing narrative still happens. So I have no idea if he's employable in any way anymore. Like I said, I don't really follow it. But he persisted in a place, in a Substack, Rumble kind of podcast world. And the same thing, I mean, you could say that sort of stuff happens with Joe Rogan all the time, but he's a whole goddamn planet, right? So he's not the person like, oh, you can't, it's fair and true enough to say you can't cancel someone who has their own platform. True enough, but Rogan is not you don't get good intelligence. No, this is a weird way of saying it. You don't get good intelligence out of Rogan's experience because there's only one of him, right? He's the exceptional podcaster or what have you. But if you look at people who are middling, and then you start to see, that kind of can't stop the signal moment is there. Now, just to get back to what I was saying before, the final moment of can't stop the signal is that these platforms may eventually fail, get co-opted, or so on. And then there'll be other ones. So it gets really, really close. And the point being, you cannot stop the signal. And I know podcasters and whatever in this sort of world who would, depending on if the grid goes down or what have you, but are perfectly prepared to like mail out CDs to a mailing list of their shows. And that kind of vibe is right there, and it can't stop the signal. But it's like a little coda to the end of the story or the framing around World Without Sin. And that's what I want you to sit with, because I'm going to use that term again a lot, probably. But the World Without Sin is the right way of I think, or the best way I've found to describe what and how something is being implemented, because it's essentially an assassin chasing after these people, but it's to stop at nothing to create a frictionless World Without Sin. And so that's where that term came from. And as you can plainly see, we needed to kind of situate that before we delve into some of the other series moving forward. But yeah, I hope you liked it. And yeah, see you in the next one.